now time for the Billy C. Show, part of the BillyCBoxing.com network.
And we're coming to you live from the Billy C. Studios in Lake George, New York. I'm Bill Calogero. It's time for the Billy C. Show. Good morning, good day, good evening, whenever you're watching, whenever you're listening. I hope you're doing okay today. Today's show is being brought to us in part by Sal's Neighborhood Pizzeria and Italian Restaurant, located on beautiful St. Simon's Island in Georgia. Check out his website, www.salsneighborhoodpizzeria.com, or give my man a call, 912-268-2328, 912-268-2328. And don't forget, we're doing a Billy C. get-together at Sal's on Saturday, April 4th. If you want to be part of it, or at least you're welcome to be part of it. Just swing by. But if you want to be part of our entourage, drop me an email, billy@talkinboxing, TalkinBoxing.com. That's my radio voice. Today's show is also being brought to us in part by the Title Bout Championship computer game. If you're looking for a decent game, now it's not a video-oriented game. It's more of a, hey, let's see how Rocky Marciano would have fared against Vladimir Klitschko type of a game. Love it. Get yourself a copy. You can go to our website, BillyCBoxing.com, and click on the banner. Today's show is also being brought to us in part by the Southern Gourmet Spice Company. Check it out, www.southerngourmetspice.com. Today's show is also being brought to us in part by our 24-hour, 7-day-a-week boxing channel. That's right, Billy C. Boxing is available on all the major streaming devices, including Roku. Just visit GinnecoUSA.com and sign up today. And finally, today's show is being brought to us in part by, you guessed it, my book, Tom Molyneux, From Bondage to Baddest Men on the Planet, is available right now where all good books are sold. You can get a copy of this book right now while you're watching or listening to this very show. Just visit BarnesandNoble.com or Amazon.com. Find out why I'm so adamant about getting Tom Molyneux's story told. And until everyone I know has a copy, I'm going to still talk about it. So, anyway, coming up on the show today, let me just get right into it. You know, I was watching the fights last night, and, you know, Danny Garcia against Ivan Redkach, and of course, the return of Jarrett Hurd going up against Francisco Santana. And, you know, I tell you the truth. I mean, to be honest with you, I was extremely disappointed in both fights. And I'll tell you why. First and foremost, Showtime. Okay, Showtime boxing, championship boxing. This was not what do they call it? What's their showbox? This wasn't a showbox where you're seeing a couple of young up and coming fighters fighting each other. No, this is supposed to be top fights, right? And now they don't have HBO anymore to compete. And what do we get? We get Danny Garcia. We got two glorified sparring sessions. That's what we got. You know, and I have to ask myself, what's happened to the sport of boxing when you watch a premier cable network and you tune in to watch a fight and you're getting a sparring match? You know, the problem I have is simply this. You know, we get into this conversation about what was a better era, boxing of yesteryear or you know, boxing today or whatever. And the realistic part of it is that you can look at the athletes of today in any sport, the athletes, the athleticism, the size, the training methods, the nutritional improvements over the last 20 years even, let alone the last 50. But all of this, honestly, equals better athletes. I mean, I don't care how much of an old time sport fan you are, like myself. I mean, I love the historical aspects of boxing, plus all sports, but and I love the way the games and fights were done back in the day, so to speak. But I can't argue that the nutritional advances and the training techniques and just humans in nature have become improved. But with that said, boxing specifically, here we have these better athletes, and we're always looking for an edge, so to speak. And because we as a society have become weak mentally, this everyone gets a trophy type of a mentality, this let's not offend anybody type of thought process, etc., etc. What we end up with is basically a sport. All sports are an entertainment aspect, right? I mean, all sports are entertainment. Now, at least in this country, you're not forced into any kind of job, really, let alone sports. So, if you're not willing to do what the sport entails, then don't do it. If you don't want to get tackled, don't become a football player. If you don't want to hit a baseball, don't become a baseball player. And if you don't want to fight, don't become a fighter. And what we see today is, we see these fights like we had to sit through and sleep through, I should say, last night on a major cable network that boasts about having major fights. And we had I'm not going to count the third fight, but the two main and co-main events were mismatches, 100% mismatches. And we watch it on prime time through a top cable company, and then you have to listen to that Mario Ronaldo, which is I want a puke bucket every time I see him. And you know what? And I had somebody even email me, oh, the poor guy battling depression. Who gives a rat's ass about him and his depression? We're all depressed. Life is depressing. I don't want to see a show about Mario Ronaldo and his depression. I could give a rat's ass about Ronaldo, okay? It's nothing less than, listen, he's doing a job. Let him do his job. Let him call the fights. I don't want to hear he hit the deck like a card dealer. Come on. He's so stupid. This guy doesn't know. I'm telling you, it ruins the broadcast. And when you're listening to a guy like that and you're being subjected to a fight like either Hurd Santana or Garcia Redcatch, it makes me sick. All right, and if you want to compare eras, which really it's hard to compare, but when you look at these other fighters and you go through the greats of yesteryear, Sugar Ray Robinson, Joe Louis, Archie Moore, Julio Cesar Chavez, Senior, that is, Roberto Duran, Harry Greb, etc., etc., etc. These fighters, okay, yes, back in the day, in the Sugar Ray Robinson era, okay, these guys fought a lot more. I mean, Sugar Ray Robinson had a career record, 174 wins, 19 losses, and 6 draws. And, of course, the unknowledgeable youth of today that watches boxing will say to me, and really believing it, well, the guy had 19 losses. How good could he be? Well, he fought everybody. There were only 10 contenders. He was a world champion in multiple divisions, etc., etc. But the key here is this. The reality here is this. Back in those days, those fighters fought tune-up fights. They fought basically sparring matches. And, they counted. So a guy that might fight back in those days, if they fight once a month or in some cases twice a month, Harry Greb used to fight every week. Harry Greb's record, 262 wins, 17 losses, and 18 draws. I mean, give me a break, right? You want to even get into a conversation about comparing him with anybody you can choose today? But anyway, I'd be lying if I said that every one of those fights all close to 300 professional fights that Harry Greb had, or taking a look at Sugar Ray Robinson and his 200 and some odd fights that he had, that every single one of them was against a top-notch opponent. That's false. That wasn't the case. Okay, the way it averaged out, if you dissect their records like I have, the truth of the matter is they most likely would have fought 4 to 6 top quality fights in 1 year. The rest of those fights, whether they were fighting every week or every month, were against similar matchups like what we had to sit through last night. My point is that all we see today from fighters is 2 fights a year, maybe 3 if they're going for Fighter of the Year award. And Fighter of the Year award, if a fighter fights 4 times, you're going to get it. If you fight 4 times and you're a Danny Garcia, people are going to say you Fighter of the Year. He fought 4 times. Ooh, Harry Greb fought 4 times in a month. But my point is that of those 2 or 3 fights, let's say, to get a fight like the ones we saw last night, as counting as a real fight, is sad, and it's a joke. What's happened to this sport when we can turn around and look at a fight like that and count it as a real fight? And then to make things worse, there weren't even great performances. Danny Garcia should have stopped Redcatch. There's no question. Did anybody notice the size differences between Danny Garcia and Redcatch and Jarrett Hurd and Santana? I mean, not only are they fighting fighters that don't possess the same skill level as them, but they were also fighting fighters that had to come up in weight to fight them. So, I mean, you might as well, why fight the fight? And then neither one of them can stop their opponent? Jarrett Hurd, practice and stuff, I mean, give him a pass, I guess. He's got a new trainer. He's trying a new style. And he went through the motions. 97, 92, 99, 90 were the way the 3 judges scored the unanimous decision win for Jarrett Hurd, who improved to 25-1 with 16 knockouts. Santana loses his 9th fight of his career, 25 wins, 9 losses, and a draw. Did that type of a fight, is it justified to be on Showtime? I mean, if we're going to put Showtime on a pedestal, if we're going to make Showtime be, a top network for only the best fights like they would suggest, you put Jarrett Hurd against Santana and let's try a jab tonight type of a game plan on championship boxing, Showtime championship boxing, that makes it to that level? And Danny Garcia, granted, he was looking for a fight with Errol Spence, and Errol Spence had to go and get wasted and crash his car and jeopardize his whole career. There's another stupid kid that doesn't realize what he's doing. You could give Garcia a pass, and you could say, well, he was going to fight Errol Spence. They didn't want to lose the date. He was training. He was this. He was that. Let's give him Redcatch. And then you can't even put him away. I mean, he improved to 36-2 with 21 knockouts, 118, 110, 117, 111 twice. Did he dominate? Yes. He dominated the fight. But he didn't put him away. He had him rocked. There was 2 rounds. I'm watching Redcatch go back to his corner. And again, Benji Estevez, I'm sorry. He could have stopped the fight. I mean, when a fighter is staggering back to his corner and his legs aren't under him and he's taking a beating and he sustains a cut, etc., he could stop the fight. And it's just, it's very disheartening to watch what we see. And then what makes it even worse isn't so much the performance, but it's the way the fan reacts. Some fans, they think this is great. They think this is boxing. I mean, like they were talking last night about, when a fighter gets a loss. They were talking about Jarrett Hurd specifically. Oh, fighter gets a loss. Boxing fans don't accept a loss. They accept losses in MMA, but they don't accept losses in boxing. And there lies the problem. What we have is a new generation of boxing fan that's coming up that just doesn't understand the sport. And it is entertainment. So you give the people what they want. So if they're going to keep paying to subscribe to a cable network like Showtime or whatever, and they're happy with what they're getting, we're going to keep getting it. We're going to keep getting it. Now, don't get me wrong. We do see some good fights. There have been. How about this? How about Andy Ruiz Jr.? Okay, I don't know if you caught this, but Andy Ruiz Jr. fired his trainer. Right? Fired his trainer, Manny Robles, who's a good trainer, regarded trainer. Now we all know that Andy Ruiz came in out of shape, and he said, well, he admitted, I was partying too much, this and that and the other thing. Well, Al Heyman, who had signed him, tells them that they got to fire him because they don't want to risk that kind of a performance again. Now, since when does the trainer get blamed for a fighter who's not showing up to the gym and not, doing what he's supposed to do? And the problem I have isn't with changing a trainer, even though I've mentioned many times that I like when fighters stick with their trainer, especially once they've become successful. But it's the mentality that, let's make it better for you. It's not your fault. Just like I opened the show saying all kids today get participation trophies. What has happened is we as a society are not held accountable for our own actions. And boxing is no different. Andy Ruiz Jr. stepped into the ring overweight. He didn't train hard. He was in a rematch. He was in, realistically, the fight of his life. And he falls flat on his face and loses. And rather than put the blame on himself, which he actually tried to do, his so-called manager, Al Heyman, says, well, it's the trainer's fault. Fire him. Get yourself a new trainer. So when does the accountability of our own actions be put on our shoulders? It's a great question for my man Sal Rocky Senacola, who joins us right now. Good morning, Sal.
Hey, good morning, Billy C. How are you and all our fans out there?
Well, hopefully they're all good, and I'm very well, thank you. I'm just a little disgusted with the fights from last night, but before I get into that, I was using, basically what I'm saying is that, the performances, I'll go back, okay, because it's not fair. I threw you in to the fighters not holding themselves accountable, and the story, so to speak, that I told was Andy Ruiz was told by his manager, Al Heyman, to fire the trainer because they don't want to risk that type of a performance that he had against Anthony Joshua to happen again. My point is it really the trainer's fault, or is it just another way that society has changed where we don't hold ourselves accountable anymore?
No, I think you made it a very good point because there's accountability across the board on all levels. And, somebody's got to answer. It just can't be deflected off one shield onto the next. And that's what I see happening over and over again. But, I definitely say that accountability is number one. If something's not working, you got to be smart enough to say, hey, I realize that I could have fought a different fight or better. I could have been better trained for this fight, and I'm going to try something new. It's the only thing they could do. But it's got to come from the fighter because I know that whenever I had Richie Giacchetti or Don Turner in my corner, I felt like we were a team. They knew me, I knew them, and I was ready to produce for them and myself. And, take full accountability. If I didn't win, I didn't win. But if I won, then thank you. It was the way it worked, the combination, the confidence I had. You hear in the boxing world, people say, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this and that, we got to do that. But guess what? It's really, it's you. You're the only one in the ring. So, yeah, I think accountability and making the right change at the right time is important, very important.
It's not like Andy Ruiz's former trainer, Manny Robles, said to him, you know what, don't train today. Go and have another cheeseburger. Oh, no, go meet your fans. Go to the bar and have a couple of drinks. Go hang out with the ladies. It wasn't saying it. So, and even during the fight, I don't recall him not giving him good advice in the corner. He was telling him to go after Joshua. He was telling him to let his hands go, and this type of thing. And yet, the so-called manager, the Al Heyman, who's really trying to ruin the sport. I know initially everybody thought he was going to help the fighters and everything else. I don't really see it as several years have gone by. But I do see, fighters like this particular case where he's, fire the trainer. It's a trainer's fault. At the end of the day, you're 100% right. I say it all the time. It's we until the fighter loses. Then it's him. He didn't do what we said. He didn't do this. He didn't do that. And in this case, all the fingers point to the trainer. It's the same thing in football or baseball. A team doesn't perform right. Well, let's face it. Reality is the coach in professional ranks, not so much in college, but in professional ranks, is the guy who's getting paid less than the players. So it's easier to blame the coach and fire him. It's less costly for owners and teams and what have you. Well, it's no different in boxing. When they sign these fighters to contracts that have TV involved or whatever, they don't want to blame the fighter. So the fighter becomes used to not holding himself accountable. It's a shame. I'm trying to compare fighters and fights between today and yesterday, and I'm wondering what's happening to the sport, because when you look at the fights from last night, Sal, here we have the main and co-main events on Showtime. This wasn't even Showbox. This was Showtime Championship Boxing, which traditionally would show the best fights. And here we are watching fights in prime time. And basically all we saw were two sparring matches. We saw two overmatched fights. Danny Garcia, and neither one of them took out their opponent. What's your thoughts on that? What's your thoughts?
It's so freaking ironic you say that, because I said to these guys, to myself, I said, I can't believe Jarrett Hurd can't put out Santana for good, and same thing with Danny Garcia. I thought he had many opportunities with the uppercut and everything else to shut down Red Cash. And I think it just didn't work out that way. And for whatever reason, it made them look mediocre.
Exactly. It's funny you say that, because I'm sitting there watching Danny Garcia, who's a good fighter, and he looked ordinary. And Jarrett Hurd looked like he was, throwing jabs for the first time in his life. I mean, the way he was, and how does these my point is, I'm not knocking them for stay busy fights or anything like that. I'm knocking Showtime for having the gall to put that on as showcase fights, as big fights. That could have been on network television or a stream somewhere, not even a top streaming service like the Zone or ESPN Plus. It could have been on anything. We could have streamed it here on BillyCBoxing.com. They were both showcase fights that shouldn't have been billed as championship caliber fights on Showtime, which they were.
Yeah, it's true. I agree 100%.
So something earlier I said, Sal, was this. I'm comparing the eras, which, it's hard to do and sometimes it's not fair. But if you take a look at eras like the Sugar Ray Robinson era, or Archie Moore, even Duran in your era, or even earlier than Sugar Ray Robinson, Harry Greb. I mean, these guys fought. Harry Greb, 300 fights around, Sugar Ray Robinson over 200 fights, etc. And the truth of the matter is all 200 of those fights that Sugar Ray Robinson fought, or 300 and some odd fights that Harry Greb fought, they weren't always against, top level opposition. They too were fighting, stay busy or tune-up fights, if you will. But the difference is they fought 12 times a year. Harry Greb fought once a week. So at the end of the year, when you looked at a year, they might have fought somewhere between 4 or 6 or even more quality championship type fights. Today's fighter, Sal, fights 2 or 3 times a year, and we have to sit through 1 or 2 of these kinds of fights of those 2 or 3 fights a year that we watched last night. That's my point.
Good point, too. It's a very good point. I'll tell you. I wish I had some answers, Bill, but I'll tell you, I think it's the lineage of how this trickle-down effect with fighters fighting mediocrity and trying to pawn it off as a big, big victory. I think, the public, boxing fans are smart. They really are. They know what they like. They know what they see. They know what to expect when you have world-class fighters in a ring. And sometimes when that's not produced, you got to question and point fingers.
Well, let me ask you this. In both cases last night, Garcia and Reddick and Hurd and Santana, both of these fighters clearly, Garcia and Hurd I'm talking about, clearly were better than their opponents. That's number one. Number two, they were also way bigger than their opponents. Both of their opponents had to come up in weight to fight them. And they looked much smaller in the ring, fighting Hurd and Garcia respectively. But my question is, why wouldn't they take a risk? Neither one of them, Danny Garcia or Jarrett Hurd, took any kind of a risk to put on a good performance, knock their opponent out, or have it, get them in enough trouble where the referee would wave off the fight. Neither one of them did it. They were both, happy with coasting to a decision win. And the mentality of don't take any chances, don't risk getting hit, don't take unnecessary punishment, etc., etc., etc. I understand it all. But if that's the attitude you're going to have, why become a professional fighter?
Exactly. Good question. And I'll tell you what, Bill, it's something we may never know. But unless they come out and say, this is why I didn't do it, this is why I didn't do that. But, I think along their lines much more than I do when we watch these fights. And, it's a painstaking process, and there's no excuse, no reason. Guys should be fighting, challenging themselves, fighting up, and demonstrating their skills.
Well,
perfecting
their skills against opponents like we saw last night, I don't have a problem with. I think it's necessary in the development of a fighter. Okay, so I don't want people to start bombarding my inbox with statements like that. My point is that they were doing it on a big stage. When you're fighting on Showtime, championship boxing, it was the same thing as when HBO was in it. When you got to HBO, that was a big fight. The next level up from that was a pay-per-view, or obviously they've changed the way things are done in today's world, but that's the kind of fights that they are. And to be fed this. Even the fans are booing. We say to ourselves, what can we do to keep boxing back in mainstream? Well, it's entertainment. If the fan isn't going to be entertained, they're not going to come next time. How many people did you hear booing both of those fights, the Garcia fight and the Hurd fight? And here we are in Brooklyn at the Barclays Center, a place that is finding a pretty good niche for professional boxing, and fans that would go and say, hey, there's a boxing match over in Brooklyn tonight, let's go. How long is it going to take before they say to themselves, why go there? Remember the last one? It was boring. It was a wasted night. We got stuck in traffic for 2 hours afterwards. I mean, doesn't the product have to speak for itself, Sal?
Well, yeah, it should. And that's in the world of boxing. It really should. The product should be speaking fine and saying, hey, this is a great match. But, we don't get that as much anymore. That's a shame, because that's what the fans deserve.
They're talking about Garcia. He wants to fight Errol Spence, but now they're saying, oh, since he beat Red Catch, now should he fight Manny Pacquiao? You say, well, how do you get a win? You don't even knock the guy out. You get a win over Ivan Redcatch, who's just a tough guy. I mean, he's a tough guy. He's got 5 losses now, and every one of them is against a decent fighter. All those other wins were against marginal. He's got a couple of wins against a decent opponent. But how does that get you into a conversation with an all-time great like Manny Pacquiao, who in himself shouldn't even be fighting? I mean, I don't understand how that performance gets you in that conversation. I just don't.
Well, and they're 2 separate conversations, and you're perfectly right. I believe, and it shouldn't be said in the same sentence. And I just think it's the way boxing is today for whatever reason. I mean, certainly not that every fight, but more times than not, we could see that the politics of boxing or the mindset of boxing has taken definitely a change.
Are we becoming too conscious of safety for fighters, in your opinion, Sal?
I'm sorry?
Are we becoming too are we becoming too safe for the sport of boxing? Is trying to have 2 guys, which let's face it, the object is to render your opponent unconscious. I mean, that's the ultimate goal. Are we becoming too safe for a sport where the object is to basically beat the hell out of your opponent?
Well, thank you, Floyd Mayweather.
Exactly.
I'm just teasing.
No, but that's true. But that's true.
Sure.
And we have a guy like Floyd Mayweather that's in discussion to fight a guy like Conor McGregor again. It's like, give me a break. It's who's going to pay for that? The only people that are going to pay for that are idiots. And I'm not going to blame the Mayweathers and the Conor McGregors for doing it, because if they can each make another $100 million or whatever the hell they're going to make, more power to them. I'm not blaming them. I'm blaming everybody else that buys it, that thinks it's real. We sat in your restaurant, and the one guy was so upset that Conor lost. He actually thought, I'll never forget it, he actually thought that Conor McGregor was going to win that fight. It was a scam. It was a scam. And I bet you those same people will show up and thinking McGregor, now that he knows how to do it, will beat him the second time. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. And if they had the rules that supported McGregor's fight style, he would have been killed. He would have been whacked. Right. One kick to the head, forget about it. You're going to lose your teeth and your mind.
I wish that's what they let happen. But anyway, yeah, I'm a little riled up today, Sal, so I apologize for that. But
no, it's fine, Bill. I was looking for a shoulder butt last night.
Yeah, and then that tops it all off. Redcatch bit Garcia's shoulder. And in the corner, his father gives him the usual comments that he does. He goes, "Danny, F him up, F him up." Yeah, okay. So I was expecting a knock after that. I got 3 more boring rounds after that, after the nibble of the shoulder. So very sickening to watch. But
well, Yeah, you're right. And then, again, we go back to accountability and we go back to changes before you have to answer to the fire. I just don't know if boxing has that fortitude anymore.
No, I don't think it does. Sal, I appreciate you joining us this morning, and we'll be looking forward to you next week, my man.
Well, thank you for having me on, Bill. I appreciate it. I love voicing my opinion and my beliefs, and I thank you so much for the opportunity. To you and your fans, have a great Sunday, and thank you again to talk to me.
Well, start stocking up for April 4th when we come down to do the show. So we will. I can't wait. I think I should start fasting in another week or so I can eat you out of everything you have, man. So I'm looking forward to that.
Me too, Billy. It's going to be a great time for all of us. So I'm looking forward to it.
All right, brother. We'll talk to you next week.
All right, brother. You take good care, and my very best to you and your family, okay?
You too, Sal. I'll talk to you soon.
All right, God bless. Bye-bye.
That's my main man, Sal Rocky Senecola, giving us his thoughts. And, I'm a bit riled up today with what we had to sit through last night. And, it just... it's got me thinking of this, Kenny Bears. You want something, of course I mentioned food with Sal, and then, I got to start thinking of what I put on all my food, right? Well, Kenny seasoning and their all-purpose seasoned salt. Check it out. Get yourself as a matter of fact, get yourself a bottle of each. The original Kenny Bears, and keeps the website up to date, and a whole bunch of other stuff. Dax Khan is with us. Good morning, Dax.
Good morning, Billy C.
How you making out today, my man?
I'm doing well. How are you, other than riled up?
I'm a little riled up, man. I'm a little riled up because I'm sitting here watching those fights last night, and I'm as far as I know, Showtime Championship Boxing, really HBO's backed out, and those broadcasts should be saved for competitive fights, and instead we got treated to two overblown sparring sessions, and neither one even dominated their opponent. I mean, on the scorecard, yes, but I was very disappointed in both. What was your thoughts, beginning with Garcia Redcatch?
Well, Ivan Redcatch is an exciting fighter. I've followed his career for quite some time. I would go and see him on those Broadway boxing shows. He's got some upset ability, but this fight was pretty much sold off of his win over Devin Alexander. But of course, Devin Alexander has only been a fraction of himself for the last 4 years. Danny Garcia, there's a guy, he's not faded. He had a close fight with Keith Thurman. He had a very good showing in his loss to Sean Porter. Just 5 years ago, he was king of the 140-pound division. He's won 2 titles at 147. I don't understand why they had him in there against somebody of this caliber. Maybe like a Sergey Lipinets or somebody like that. A former champion would have been an opponent that would have been acceptable for the Showtime broadcast, because I see that's what you're pretty upset over, is the fact that fights of this quality, they were put on Showtime. And I agree with you, 100%. But Danny Garcia, while he is still one of the best fighters in the world, at 147 pounds, Bill, I just don't think he has the pop, the power, to beat these top names. And what I can see happening to Danny Garcia is a few more fights like this, or gosh forbid, a loss, and he can almost become the next Austin Trout of the PBC. Remember, Austin Trout, after he lost his title to Erislandy Lara, he would be put into fights like this to make look really well against this caliber of opponent, and then he would be put in there against one of the other champions who was in a stay busy fight while they were looking for another big fight. Does that make any sense? Do you understand what I'm saying? Did you see how that pattern was? And I can see that pattern happening with Danny Garcia, and that'd be a shame if it did.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. The thing that I see with Garcia, in all honesty, and because I know his father wanted Danny to retire, after his loss, his second loss. The thing that I think Danny Garcia is looking for is one more huge payday, and then he's done. I don't, I think it to me it appears that love of the sport is gone. The energy that we used to get from him and, believe it or not, his dad together in the corner seems to be missing. I just saw a going through the motions Danny Garcia last night. I just saw a guy who was not concerned with Red Catch, and I agree with you. Red Catch is a tough guy, but here he is going up in weight for all intent purposes against Garcia, who looked way bigger. And Garcia should have taken the opportunity and take a little risk and put on a show, and he didn't. He decided to go through the motions. The same thing with Jarrett Hurd. And I just thought that on Showtime Championship Boxing, we should be treated to better matchups. I'm not saying it necessarily had to be a pure 50-50 matchup, which I think honestly it should. But it could have been a 60-40 or even a 70-30. I mean, we were talking about, 90-10 matchups last night, Dax.
Yeah, absolutely. They were, it was, 90-10. Wow, Bill. With Jarrett Hurd, I wasn't sure to think about it when it was announced. On this show, I have defended Jarrett Hurd's actions on not fighting Julian Williams in a rematch. I thought, as I stated on here, I think a couple weeks ago, is that maybe Hurd was looking to make that jump to 160, and the weight cut down to 154, has been really hurting him. And at 160, he'll feel better. He'll be a little bit faster. He'll be a little bit stronger, and he goes and he fights Santana, who has journeyed above 154 a few times. He's got a sturdy chin. His only KO loss, I believe, was to Kareem Mayfield back in 2009. That was a young Kareem Mayfield. He was a hot prospect. Hurd in his post-fight interview stated he did what he wanted to do. He was happy with his performance. He wanted to win rounds. He wanted to not go toe-to-toe, which is okay. But and I guess, a guy like Santana is the type of guy that you would fight if you wanted to kind of change your style. I don't really know if Jarrett Hurd is completely capable of changing his style. But, Hurd was the boss of a division until a fight ago. Did he need a confidence builder fight? I don't know. Did loss to Williams actually do something to Hurd where they needed to go in there and give him a fight that would build his confidence, and maybe they can work on some things? You really don't know because you're not in the camp. All I know is that Julian Williams at 154 pounds, and he's not getting the title. Jarrett Hurd, 154 pounds, he's not going to get his title rematch against Julian Williams because he lost that to Jason Rosario. And Jason Rosario, not only is he all wrong for Williams, but he's definitely all wrong for a slow plodding Jarrett Hurd who takes too many punches. So I'm not really sure what's next for Jarrett Hurd.
Well, one of the things I did agree with Jarrett Hurd's approach was that, and what he's doing now with a new trainer, is he's trying to be a little more defensive to avoid taking the punishment that we've become accustomed to him taking. And I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with him learning and trying to go through rounds and all of that. I'm okay with all those things he said. What I'm not okay with is that it was the co-main event on a Showtime Championship Boxing broadcast, where we should be seeing, top-notch fights and or matchups at least. That's where my problem is. That we shouldn't be putting those kinds of fights on that kind of network, as a co-main event. That's all. If he was on the undercard, I don't have a problem with it. But we're watching two overblown sparring matches last night, and to make it worse, I had to listen to Ronaldo with the, he just hit the deck like a card dealer. It was just the same old crap with them, and I just don't know if it's ever going to change.
I agree, and if these night, me, I'm on social media during the fights. That seemed to be the problem with everybody, is that this happened to be presented as a main event on Showtime. So, and that's the frustrating part. These fights would have been good if they were on the undercard of a meaningful fight as a way, to kind of, get fans ready for that bigger fight, to give fans something to do while they're going to the snack bar or something like that, but definitely not as main events. I had actually, Bill, was changing back and forth over to Bellator on DAZN because they had Ava Knight was on there. So, that's about how much, this really held my attention. That's sad when you're watching MMA and boxing at the same time, and MMA is actually what's, catching your attention. That tells you exactly, the quality of fights that these were.
Exactly. And these fights, you get rounds in, whatever, and at some point in time, you take the training wheels off, and you say, okay, finish your opponent. And neither one of them did. And I look at these kinds of fights, and the truth of the matter is they're being accepted by a certain type of fan. A fan that's not knowing and doesn't understand. They're okay with this. And I think it hurts the sport overall. And it puts a blemish on it because we have gotten some good fights over the last couple of years. We've gotten some great matchups. We've had some entertaining fights, all of that. And then this gets put out, and now, it's the most recent thing. This is what's on my mind. Watching Showtime Championship Boxing and watching all them telling you how great their commentators are and this and that. I mean, it was like a Showtime commercial, and yet they're trying to bamboozle you with, keeping your attention away from the two fights that we had to suffer through as viewers.
Last night, Marty Mulcahy brought up a very good point on Twitter, stating, what if Danny Garcia had a bigger fan following? Not that he's not a popular guy, but, I'm talking about a bigger fan following, like an Errol Spence type fan following or a Terrence Crawford type fan following. You get what I'm saying? Would he be in a fight like this? Kind of how I look at these two fights last night is, because Jarrett Hurd doesn't have a huge fan following, not compared to his counterparts, in the division or in the PBC either. So if these guys have bigger fan followings, would they have been in these fights, these quality of fights, or were these fights really actually meant to generate some interest in these guys, and they were supposed to be, these showcases that they weren't on paper, and they ended up being snoozers. Does that actually hurt these guys?
Well,
the fighters themselves, and their popularity and their appeal with these fickle boxing fans.
Well, the truth of the matter is can we really blame the fighters? I mean, do we really blame the Jarrett Hurds and the Danny Garcias? Or even, I think a lot of the way this sport has turned was Floyd Mayweather's fault in the style he fought. But do we really blame them as fighters? Because let's face it, they are just trying to make as much money as they can, just like anyone else in life. You try to make the most money you can for, the least amount of effort. I hate to say it, but that's the truth. If you can, make more money and not, endanger yourself or risk anything and somebody's willing to write the check, you're going to do it. So I don't really blame it on the fighter. I blame it more on the management and the promotion and the networks to allow it. Because what they're doing, the fan, as long as the fan keeps buying it, they're going to keep giving it. Because until the fan walks away, like my point to Sal earlier was, here we are at the Barclays Center in Brooklyn, a venue that's trying to, become, one of the tops, if they're not already, for the sport of boxing. And it seemed like there was a decent crowd in there, and they're booing both of those fights. So my question is, those same fans, are they just going to show up on fight night regardless of who's going to fight? Or is there going to come a point, which I believe will happen, where they say, forget that. I'm not going to waste my money on that. I'll go do something else. I'll go watch, reruns or something like that. That's the part that I think is hurting the sport.
No, I agree. I'm not blaming the fighters. They're just fighting who their matchmakers and their promoters put them in there against. This has nothing to do with the fighters. They're out there. They're doing their job. So it's not like Jarrett Hurd or Danny Garcia call their own shots. They're even though they're former world champions and they're elite fighters worldwide. They're not in that position where they decide who they fight. So it's unfair to criticize them. And with your point, that Danny Garcia actually has a pretty big following in New York. He's fought at the Barclays Center. I think that was his 6th or 7th time. So for them to be booing, that kind of more or less tells you right there that they're not really going to buy this for much longer. And that was my point on, does it really hurt their marketability putting them in there against guys like this on a Showtime broadcast?
Well, the problem I have with the fan base, with the new fan base, is that you're right, they're fickle. And are they fans of the sport or are they fans of the fighter? And if they've leaned towards becoming fans of the fighter, like, Floyd had his fan base, and he was also very successful with having people who hated him buy his fights. So he had the pros and cons of him, in a sense, that paid for his fights. Now you see other fighters coming up, and you say to yourself, well, are people becoming fans of them? And if they don't perform, do they walk away from the sport? Or are they fans of the sport, where they can evaluate different fighters and continue? My fear is that the majority of the new fan base, I'll just refer to it as a newer fan base, I think they're more fans of specific fighters than they are of the sport. Because when you get in discussions, and you're in the battle field of discussions with a lot of young kids with your involvement in the amateurs, that they must, a lot of these young kids, from what I see, don't go back and learn about the historical aspect of the sport. And I think that's where the root of the problem begins.
Well, it's not only fans of just a fighter, but nowadays, maybe you should say the organization, whether or not they just watch, PBC, or they just watch fights that are on DAZN, and so on. And these younger kids, you bring up a great point. I speak to them all the time, and you'd be surprised at what they don't know about the sport. They don't watch the sport very much, other than a certain few fighters. And so what you're saying right there makes 100% sense, that because they don't watch the entire sport, they only watch a few fighters. And nowadays, in this era, if you lose that all of a sudden, you're not a viable, marketable fighter worth watching, no matter who that came to, and no matter how it happened, then, it definitely does hurt the fighters. It hurts this whole. So, what more can you say? It is what it is, Bill, and hopefully this pattern, this trend doesn't continue.
I hope so.
But, just one thing off topic, you mentioned like safety a few times, and I know you're not an MMA fan. I'm really not. Like I stated, I only watch it because of Ava Knight and Chris Cyborg last night, and these fights weren't all that good. But go and watch that Bellator card on DAZN. Just watch this fight between Jason King and Raymond Daniel. Bill, it's the scariest KO I've ever seen. And I don't understand how this wasn't stopped, because it wasn't like, it was a brutalized. Raymond Daniel hits Jason King with this punch that totally removes him from his senses. And you can see this guy's just, his neurological system is just not attached to him. And the referee, Mike Beltran, lets this continue. And it was almost sad in a way, where Jason King tries to throw a punch back out of instinct, but you could see in his eyes, he's just not there. And you speak about has the sport become too safety orientated. I don't know if it's so much safety orientated, but definitely, Bill, you have to watch this. This has to be one of the most scariest moments I've ever seen in my life watching combat sports, because I literally was saying to myself, one more punch and this guy's going to be hurt for good. I can't even describe it. You have to watch that, and the next time you come back, just tell me what you thought of it.
The thing is that the referees and the officials are the ones that should be looking out for the safety of the fighter. I agree. And I think that, some of these referees, they put fighters in danger. Maybe they're out of shape. They can't get to them quick enough. Maybe they don't even know what they're watching. I don't know. But
this lasted for about 15 seconds afterwards. He gets hit with this punch, Bill, and you can see it just totally removes him from his senses, and he's more or less just on autopilot, and he's not even sure what's going on. And you have to see it to understand why this was such a scary moment. I can't believe that this was allowed to go on.
Well, there
was no punching back. The guy wasn't defending himself. It was
even in the fight with Reddick last night. Redkach was staggering, going back to his corner, and Benji Esteves. He could have stopped the fight. I mean, when a guy can't find his way to his corner and then comes out the next round and he still didn't look right, and I'm watching from my living room, it makes you question the third man in the ring. I got to be honest. But hey, listen, two quick things before we let you go. There's some fights. Well, one quick thing. I just want to get your thoughts. There's some fights on Thursday, and we're talking about terrible matchups. I'm not expecting much of a fight between Demetrius Andrade and Luke Keeler, despite Luke Keeler saying that he's guaranteeing that he's going to win. But I do think that the Tevin Farmer Jojo Diaz fight is going to be a good one. What's your thoughts on that fight? How do you see it going, and what's your prediction?
I like the Tevin Farmer Jojo Diaz fight simply because of the contrast in styles. Whether or not Jojo Diaz is good enough to get by Tevin Farmer's slick boxing ability, I don't know. Isn't this like Jojo Diaz's third shot at a world title in within a matter of 2 years?
I thought it was his second, but he lost the guy. I thought his title shot was against Gary Russell Jr., and that's his only loss. So that fight I think was his shot at a title, and now this is the second.
And Andrade, as skilled as he is, and as much as we really thought that Andrade was going to be really successful in this sport, he's just been so mediocre at best, and he's still calling out Canelo and Triple G and saying that he's been ducking them, and they can't duck him any longer. It's we speak about all the time how boxing is a business, and you have to be marketable and viable. Demetrius Andrade, I've never seen a guy who is that skilled, but so unappealing to the fans, if that makes sense. Fans don't, they're not excited to watch Demetrius Andrade fight. They were about 4 or 5 years ago on his way up, but since then, Demetrius Andrade, it's, what are you going to do tonight? Demetrius Andrade fight is on. Well, I'm going to go get bamboo shoots up my fingernails. Yeah, sounds like a good idea. I think I'll do that too.
The problem with Demetrius is that he made a bad business decision. He should have never stayed with Star Boxing and Banner. And, no offense to Artie or my man Joe, but the truth of the matter is that by him staying signed with those guys, he never got the opportunity. They weren't willing to invest big money, and they were hoping that some big fight would come along, and it didn't. So Demetrius wasted a lot of his prime years, seeking out those big fights. And then when you start talking about a guy like Canelo's in a position where he only wants big fights, financial big fights. And does Demetrius really bring that to the table? Demetrius needs to fight and beat another almost big name, and I don't mean to say this in a negative way to all of our British fans, but like a Billy Joe Saunders type of a fight would have been good for him. A Triple G fight would be good too, but Triple G, why would he fight him? He's looking for the same thing Canelo is. So I think he's become the odd man out. And as you know as well as anyone, the biggest enemy to any athlete is time. You start to age, and the best Demetrius Andrade is behind us.
Well, absolutely. That was my point. Like you were stating, does he bring enough to the table for these big money fights? Because he doesn't dazzle the fans and he's not exciting. No, he doesn't. In fact, fans most likely, going back to the fickle part, despite Demetrius being undefeated, fans would crucify Canelo for fighting him. Right.
No, I agree with that. And if things would have been different, if some of his opponents would have been a little more recognizable, maybe he earns a big money fight. But right now, I think he's fighting in the shadows, and the belt means nothing. So, anyway,
that it's a shame to see a career go down like that.
A successful.
We don't have time to go into explain exactly what happened promotionally with Demetrius Andrade, but he's only 31 years old, Bill. It's not like he's been in any wars, so I wouldn't go as far as to say, his best days are behind him. I actually think he's in his prime, but, he just really seems content on doing enough to win rather than doing enough to get himself to that next level in terms of marketability, place himself in those big fights, because he has What's he got now? Almost 30 fights, and not one of them has really been something that any fans can sit there and say they remember. Nobody's going to sit there and say, as of right now, do you remember that fight when Demetrius Andrade faced? There is no fight that stands out like that, and because there's no fight that stands out like that, he brings nothing to the table against any of these top names.
Martirosyan, way back in 2013, 7 years ago, he squeaked by with a 12-round split decision. Aside from him, I mean, yeah, he's got some wins over decent names like Lantez Fox and Saluki in his last fight. Willie Nelson, when Willie Nelson was something in back in 2016. Even the tough Brian Rose went 7 rounds with him. But that's it. You're 100% correct. At 28-0, he's got no memorable fights that people are going to remember, and his markability is down. He needs some dance partners if he expects to get big dollars. The best thing he did was sign with Matchroom, and we'll see what happens down the road. But as far as a Canelo and a Triple G fight, I think he's going to have to be looking elsewhere, but that's just my thought.
Absolutely, because Canelo, as you stated, and I think everybody knows, Canelo's only looking for these very top names, not only financially, but just because I believe right now Canelo's he's certainly past the financial stage. I mean, he's set for life. He's set for 4 lifetimes. Right now, Canelo is working on a legacy, and Demetrius Andrade isn't exactly that guy that will help cement that legacy.
No, not at all. Dax, appreciate your time. Look forward to you next week, brother.
All right, everybody, enjoy your day.
That's Dax Khan. You can check out his column up on BillyCBoxing.com. And it's kind of on his business decision by staying with Star and Banner. But anyway, what's happened to the sport of boxing? Joining us right now is my man Alex Papali. Good morning, Alex.
Good morning, Billy C. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing okay. I'm a little riled up this morning. I had to sit through those 2 sparring sessions on Showtime last night. And, it bothered me not only to listen to Mario Ronaldo, which is, like Dax says, I'd rather go get bamboo shoots shoved up my fingernails. But, I mean, he's just so terrible. And, I don't want to see the Trail of Tears about his battle with depression. Oh, yeah, boo-hoo-hoo. We're all depressed. But, to watch those shows, those 2 fights on what is really the premier cable network for boxing right now with no competition other than the streaming services, which is a whole nother ballgame. And to have them give us those fights, I'm sick to my stomach. What was your thoughts?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think it does say something about how much the sport has changed. That what used to be, what like you and Sal were saying, the place to go. That was what a fighter aspired to, is getting a contract with an HBO or a Showtime. And it was especially through the 80s. It was like if you weren't with one, you were with the other. And to think that that's what that has become now. But, things change, and it was interesting because Al Bernstein was starting his 40th year. It was the first broadcast of his 40th year, so it does say something, but it's kind of sad because, I think Al Bernstein has had a great career, but what they gave us last night was like a gift from the great Kaká.
So a guy like Al Bernstein, I mean, yeah, he's starting his 40th year. We're in our 16th, so we got to catch up to him. But, with all the great fights he's seen and called, I got to believe that he's saying, he's looking at himself in the mirror going, well, at least I'm getting a paycheck, and because, it was terrible. And then what made it worse, and I don't blame the fighters to a degree, but what made it worse was the fact that they both were like admitting that they were trying to get rounds in and this and that. And it just, as a consumer who pays for that type of a service, I feel ripped off. And I just, I look at it this way. I was comparing fights of yesteryear. It's very hard to compare eras because I will admit the fighters of today are in better shape. They're physically better. They're nutritionally better. I mean, they're faster, bigger, stronger, the whole nine. And you go back and you compare to the guys I keep bringing up this morning is like Sugar Ray Robinson, Harry Greb, to name two from past eras. Sugar Ray Robinson over 200 fights, Harry Greb 300 fights. And yeah, they didn't always get in those knockout, drag-out, top-notch fights, every one of those 300 fights for Harry Greb or 200 fights for Sugar Ray. But in a course of a year, these guys were fighting once a month. Harry Greb fought once a week. They still fought, a half a dozen meaningful fights. In today's landscape of the sport of boxing, we're giving Boxer of the Year awards for a fighter who fights 3 or 4 times. You're getting an award. You're a lock. And if we have to watch a Danny Garcia twice a year or a Saul Canelo Alvarez twice a year, why should we be subjected to a sparring match as one of those fights? That's my point, let alone having it be on Showtime's championship boxing.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's the problem with what happened last night is the Jarrett Hurd matchup, I think, was understandable, was because he was coming off a layoff and a loss. But it should have been, like way more. It wasn't appropriate as the the co-feature, which is the role they put in it, because all it did was mostly put people to sleep. And yeah, I have no problem letting a fighter change his style and work and stuff, because a lot of people on the social media out there, it's comical, because then people come to the aid of the fighter, and they're like saying things like, he has every right to do this kind of thing. Right, but there's also the fact that boxing is sport. It's also spectacle. And part of that is you giving 100%. And nobody wants to watch a sparring session unless they know, hey, this is an exhibition. I've been out of the ring for 10 months, and I'm just going to spar with this guy for 10 rounds to try to get my timing back, work on some new things. But you're right. Putting it on Showtime is kind of like, hey, guess what, fans? We're giving you garbage tonight.
Exactly. Exactly.
And that's one of the things that I always liked about Larry Merchant, is that a lot of times he would say that. I remember there was a couple of HBO shows where he's like, tonight we brought you crap.
Yes.
And I mean, I think that was the thing. There was a moment where it was during the Hurd fight where Morrow did say something to Al, like, I'm trying it here, Al. So that was like the only little chink in the armor there where it seemed like, oh, they are aware that this is a crappy card. I don't know. Especially, I think the guy that deserves the most criticism is Danny Garcia, because he thinks of himself, and Showtime thinks of him as a power broker in the division. You don't do that if you're the power broker in the division. I mean, if you do, you take him out. You don't box through 12 dull rounds.
Exactly. And in both fights, and you're right with Hurd, but still, it shouldn't have been the co-main event. I mean, it could have been on the undercard, and he could practice his jab there, instead of a co-main event. But both of these guys were in with sacrificial lambs. Neither one of these opponents really had any chance to win. Not only did the skill level was so different between the two, but the size, Red Catch and Santana were both looked like they were in 2 weight classes below their opponents in Garcia and Hurd, and the safety thing, I'm torn, because it's like, I get it, we all want people to be safer today. It started way back when they come out and they start forcing you to wear a seatbelt, and that was a big thing, and you can't even start your lawnmower without. I can't risk cutting my hand off with a lawnmower anymore because it shuts off automatically. I can't risk going through my windshield anymore when I drive my car because I have to put the seatbelt on, otherwise I get a ticket. It's like I'm losing that excitement that I might give myself to make it a little challenging. The ride to work, I might go through the windshield this morning, or I might cut my foot off while I try to cut the friggin' lawn. Stuff like that. And the age-old, comment that we'll never forget. A guy like Victor Ortiz who says on a post-fight show after he got his ass beat from one end of the ring to the other, no one should take a beating like that. Yeah, nobody if you're an accountant or if you're a carpenter or if you're a mechanic. But when you become a professional boxer, you kind of got to think somewhere along the line you're going to take a few shots. Nobody's forcing these guys to be in this field, Alex. So where is the line where we say, let's put the burden of safety in the referee/commission's hands and let the fighters do what they're supposed to do? And like you've said on this show many times, and I quote, the object of boxing is to render your opponent unconscious. You've said that, you've pointed that out, and that is the bottom line with the sport of boxing, and yet we don't want to take a guy out because it might be risky. In order to take the guy out, to land that uppercut that'll take his head off, or to land those combinations that will put him down on the canvas, I might take a punch. Ooh, we don't want to do that.
Right, and that's I think what you saw was the glaring difference between the Fulton-Kegai fight, which made that fight entertaining, even though it was pretty one-sided throughout. It made it entertaining throughout, was that both guys had that there was danger in both of them. They both were trying to, do damage, and both guys seemed to have the ability to hurt each other because they were of similar size, and their records were identical at the time. Now Fulton is, one ahead of him. No. I think because K guy I guess was 16-0-1 and Fulton was 17-0. But that fight was enjoyable because you had Fulton who was boxing more and K guy who even though a lot of his shots were cuffing shots, I bet you Fulton is hurting today. I bet you he's all lumped up. Those kind of shots take a toll as the fight goes on. And that fight was entertaining because, you're putting guys in there who are going to test each other. There was no tests in the other two fights. And I think that's the thing that's really important. Unfortunate really is that's what you get a lot with a lot of these PBC fights is maybe a matchup that has, an A fighter and then a name. Like they were talking about the Devon Alexander victory. Yes, on paper that looks good, knocking out Devon Alexander. But not when you think, well, wait a minute, he's not the same Devon Alexander who beat Juan Urango. He's nowhere near that guy anymore. So that's a lot of stuff you get with the PBC is just, I don't know, I think of it as sort of corporate speak. We've gotten this country, been overwhelmed with advertising speak since the 40s. It's a lot of times it's hard to tell. Some people can't tell what's real anymore. And I think that's the thing with the PBC is that last night you had two fights that were not really fights. They were showcases. And even though one guy, the opponents were like, overwhelmed by size, overwhelmed by experience, but they're not significant matchups at all when you pull the veneer off. And some fans can't do that. Some fans don't care about doing that because they like the A-side fighter. That's who they're there for. But as you saw last night, they cared.
But that's the problem. The PBC fan, so to speak, doesn't know the sport. And if all they're doing is hoping that their guy beats up that sacrificial lamb, they're going to be the first, and trust me, they're going to be the first to run in the opposite direction when their guy loses. That's what's going to happen to Deontay Wilder. You watch. Deontay Wilder, all the fans that are supportive of him are going to scatter like a cockroaches when he gets knocked out.
what you said about this before is one of the dangers of the PBC is they're not making boxing fans. They're making like individual athlete fans.
Right. And if you stop and think about a fight that would have been extremely entertaining last night on Championship Boxing, brought to us by Showtime, it would have been Santana against Redcatch. Give me those two guys. That would have been a great fight because the level of talent is similar. You know, they would have been trying to do what they were trying to do against monsters that were bigger than them and stronger than them and better than them. And if they would have fought the same style fight against each other, we'd be talking about fight of the year. I would have loved to have seen Santana fight Ivan Redcatch last night.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, is that they're not into making fights. And that's one of the changes about Showtime, is I remember in the early 2000s, that was one of their mottos was great fights, no rights. That has definitely changed. Now it's all about rights to promote one guy's fights, no matter who they're against. And it's kind of sad because, you know, I don't know. Showtime hadn't done a championship boxing show, I think, in a while, and then you get that. That's pretty disappointing.
Yeah, well, between that and Rollo, it makes me sick. But when I think of Showtime, I do like their Showbox series. Steve Farhood and Barry Tompkins, they do a great job. You never hear the stupidity that comes out of Ronaldo's mouth on those broadcasts, and generally we do see fights that are somewhat even on paper, and we normally get decent performances. So, I mean, as far as I'm concerned, Showbox for Showtime is the premier fight show, because the championship boxing has fallen way down, in my opinion.
Well, I agree with you. I think that Steve Farhood, Barry Tompkins, Raul Marquez crew is the best in the biz right now.
Best in the biz. I agree.
They don't scream. They don't overreact. They don't try to make allusions to popular cultural things that no one cares about. They don't, they're not, they don't get caught up in little digressions. They talk about what's in front of them, and they do a great job.
I like Sergio Mora. I think he does a great job on DAZN. Yeah. I mean, and when I got to sit and chat with him in Vegas on our show, my whole feelings towards him. Well, as a fighter, I got to admit, I was never a big fan, but he certainly knows his stuff, and I love him as a commentator. That's for sure. And
you went home and you stopped at Petco and you adopted a garter snake?
No, I didn't do that. But the bruises from B-Hop have finally healed on my back, so I feel good about that. But on Thursday, we got a couple of fights. The main event is Demetrius Andrade, a guy that's close to you, a New England fella, taking on Luke Keeler, and there's been some talk back and forth between Keeler, who's ranked in the middleweight division at number 28, going against Andrade, who's number 7. Andrade is a guy that Dax and I were talking about. He's 31 already, but he's seemingly never really found the big payday. I don't see this fight being competitive at all. Does Keeler have a chance?
Not much of one, but I think everybody has a chance. But no, not a significant one. I do like that they're having a fight card this week, but and I am looking forward to that Tevin Farmer, just because Tevin Farmer is a guy that I think is somebody you want to watch every time he's in the ring at this point. That unfortunately cannot really be. I cannot say the same thing, at least personally, about Demetrius Andrade. He tends to be kind of dull. He is very skilled. This is definitely an important fight for him, because I think there's matchups out there for him that could be good.
What? Give me one.
The Golovkin fight would be one.
Okay, but does that make financial sense, that fight?
Well, not for Golovkin,
right,
but it's for him.
Right. Any of those big fights make financial sense for him. It's the other guy, like who. So when I start thinking of Demetrius Andrade, I don't see those big money fights. I don't see the dance partner, unless I'm forgetting somebody. Who could it be? Charlo. See, now I would like to see him fight Charlo, but Charlo doesn't fight anybody. Charlo's a PBC product, and they're banking on their popularity because not of their boxing talent, because they're twins. And that's the truth. I don't care what anybody says. Charlo brothers are a couple of punks that talk a lot of smack, and they haven't proved it in the ring. Although the Tony Harrison fight was exciting because he came back. Charlo came back from being down on my card big time to winning by knockout. But his brother in the middleweight division, he's nothing as far as I'm concerned. And maybe a Demetrius Andrade fight and a win for Charlo would put him on the map. But I don't think he beats Demetrius.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that would be a good fight. I'd like to see Andrade versus Charlo. But I do think that I think he probably wants Golovkin more. I think because of DAZN and Matchroom being involved, there's money there. So I think those fights might happen. But you're right. It doesn't seem like we're going to get Andrade versus Canelo. I have a feeling Canelo is going to fight Billy Joe Saunders, as you mentioned earlier. But I do think that because I think that's the thing we and that's sad too, because Callum Smith is the guy you'd rather see Canelo fight, but Billy Joe Saunders would be the path of lesser resistance, so that's probably what we'll get.
I think Saunders and Daniel Jacobs should be the fight, super middleweight, and I do think Callum Smith and Canelo would be the big money fight. For Canelo, and no disrespect to Callum Smith, but I think he's perfect for Canelo. I think Canelo beats him, and I think Danny beats Billy Joe Saunders. Again, Demetrius Andrade, the odd man out.
Yeah. Yeah, he's in a very difficult position, and a major part of it, he shouldn't be surprised by this. I'm sure he's aware of it. Some of it is his style of why he didn't take off as a star, because he's very skilled. But yeah, that's the thing. I think, like you said, it does come down to seatbelt, Billy C, because that's what this sport is about risk. And it is about managing risk, but the best fighters risk everything. That's why we're still talking about Manny Pacquiao in 2020.
The most exciting fighters risk everything. They may not necessarily be the best, but then what defines being the best? If you keep winning, that's been my argument about Floyd Mayweather, among several. But the main argument is, why should we assume how great he is? Because he has demonstrated the ability to stay away from an opponent. He hasn't ever beat the crap out of an opponent. I mean, he's never, we're never talking about, oh my God, did you see that knockout? Floyd destroyed that guy. You never talk about that, and when he himself used to say stuff like, I don't have to fight Triple G because I know I could beat him, or I don't have to fight this one because it won't be a tough fight. Okay, since you're saying that's good. You prove it in the ring, and I think that, we have a lot of talented fighters. The problem is they just don't fight each other. They put them in mismatches. But real quick, getting to the fight Thursday night, which I do think is going to be a competitive fight, Tevin Farmer against Jojo Diaz. Tevin Farmer, I love his climb to a title. Lost several fights early in his career. But, when I look at his resume, really, his last 6 fights stick out, but they haven't been against great opposition, just decent opposition. And when you look at Jojo Diaz, I remember early in his career, I kept saying, when are they going to step him up? When are they going to step him up? But when I look at his last 10 fights, 9 of those 10 were against better than decent opposition, And, of those 10 fights, he went 10-1, losing to Gary Russell Jr., where he was just outboxed. The speed and boxing ability of Russell Jr. Was too much for him. I like this fight, and I don't think Tevin Farmer has the boxing ability of Gary Russell Jr. I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a very good matchup. And didn't we see Joseph Diaz saying goodbye to his family when we were sitting outside the MGM Grand watching those two people smoke that funny little cigarette?
Yeah, we did. He was he had what color hair? Didn't he have like green hair or something?
It was, yeah. There was some color into it, yeah. Well, maybe I was seeing.
Yeah, yeah.
It was a funny little cigarette.
Yeah, I know. It's
I agree. I think that's going to be a really good fight.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that one for sure. But real quick,
I do have to see, because I think it must be. I don't know if it was on Showtime Extreme. I looked last night to see if they did any of the undercards, but I don't think they did. But I guess there was another Wilder Fury 2 press conference. So I'm going to see if I could check that out, because I guess they tried to, of course, get Tyson Fury to say something derogatory towards Wilder, and I guess he kind of took the classy road last night. So they're still trying to, hit that fight hard. I'm looking forward to that. We're less than a month away now, and that's going to be a good fight.
So that fight is a well-anticipated fight, but you do know that they already have the third fight in the books, right? So because the first fight was a draw, it doesn't matter who wins this fight. It will still set up a third fight. So whoever loses the fight in February is going to have they don't want to make excuses, but they're going to have an excuse of why they lost, which would, build up for the third fight. Which is good and bad. I do like the matchup. I do think, I don't believe Tyson Fury is going to really try to knock out Deontay Wilder in the second round like he keeps having that dream. I think that's just his approach to try and get Deontay to attack him, because that's his best way of fighting when his opponent is charging him. We saw him have all kinds of trouble when a fighter was disciplined and didn't come after him. And Tyson Fury is a different fighter if you're fighting him, if you're trying to outbox him. If you're coming at him, you're not going to outbox him. But if you're making him throw the first punch and make him be the aggressor, he's a different opponent. We just don't have Deontay Wilder with the technical ability to do that. So, it's going to be interesting to see over the next 24 rounds if it goes that far.
Yeah, the idea of them already signing a third fight, I hear what you're saying, but I kind of hope that it won't affect what we're going to see, that both these guys are competitive enough that they're not going to just waltz through 12 rounds. I think they both want an emphatic victory. And I'm sure if the victory for either one of them is, brutal enough, the third fight might go out the window.
Well, they don't have to do it, right? So in other words, right. if the third fight, if somebody wins by a brutal knockout in this fight, or if it's another, let's look at it the other way. Realistically, if it's a brutal knockout, Tyson Fury's the guy getting knocked out. Right. If it's another boxing lesson, and this time Fury stays on his feet and wins, if I'm Tyson Fury, why do I have to fight Wilder again? Make Wilder fight somebody else. And quite honestly, if I'm Wilder and I knock out Tyson Fury and he's, laying there and this time he doesn't get up, why do I want to fight him? The only reason is for the money. But, does a Anthony Joshua fight become more financially, an advantage to the winner of this second fight? I would think so.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that if whatever happens in this rematch, if it's definitive, people are going to want the Anthony Joshua fight, because no matter who wins, if it's Wilder, or Fury, well, now the only thing you want to know is what happens when they fight the other guy.
Right.
And the only other guy standing would be Anthony Joshua. So, and again, we still have Alexander Usyk, who might, make some noise in that division this year. I think he will. So I don't know. I think that's the thing that's cool about this is the heavyweight division is exciting, even though none of these guys is an all-time great, at least at this point. They don't look like that. Maybe they will. But, there's guys you can go through when you look at the history of the sport, you think, okay, well, he'd take him out, that kind of thing. Granted, that's all just up here. Those are all just, assumptions we're making in our heads. But, when you watch the sport long enough, you see what's in front of you. And, as much as the raw power of Deontay Wilder's that skill, Tyson Fury is very skilled. He doesn't hit very hard, and he's got other vulnerabilities. So, these guys aren't the greatest heavyweights ever, but they're good enough to make for some really fun fights, I think.
Well, I think every generation will it's only fair that they produce an all-time great. It's when you put the all-time greats against each other where you really, shake out the better fighters from the others. Like, for example, it made me literally sick to see the computer rankings on BoxRec, and I hate to promote them, but I will. All-time pound for pound, they got Floyd Mayweather as number one. I mean, how does that happen? How do you put him over Sugar Ray Robinson, Harry Greb, Sam Langford, all those great fighters? I mean, it just does not compute, and it's a joke, and it makes me sick. But one last question for you, going back to the fights last night. Jarrett Hurd, Swift, which I wonder where they get that from, because he's not exactly fleet of foot or have he's not too quick with his hands. Do you think? I know that he was working on his jab, but do you think that that's going to help him when he's challenged against somebody not Santana, that he's 3 times the size, that was never anything more than just a sparring partner type guy? I mean, do you think that he will pick that up, or do you think when he gets into a real fight against a real opponent that we're going to see the Jarrett Hurd of old? I mean, after all, he did admit that one of the reason why they're working on the jab so much is because he's trying to avoid getting hit as much as he used to, which I do believe is a good idea.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I definitely agree with you that the things that he was doing were wise. The thing about it was that it just wasn't very enjoyable to watch. If he had a bigger opponent in front of him, it might have been. But that's the thing, and it would be more dangerous, and it would have been a much tougher lesson. And I think this is one of those things that you've talked about many times before, Bill, is that if you're a team and you play the worst team in the league, you keep playing them and you keep pounding them, well, you think you're terrific, but you're playing the worst team. You're not learning anything. You're not testing yourself. You only get better by. I mean, that's the thing that's amazing about this sport. That's so different from all the others. Is that when you get right down to it, things that make a great fighter are the same things now that made a great fighter in 1805 or 1705 or 1905. It's running and sparring. It's not cryotherapy. It's not vegan diets. It's not keto diets. It's not life cycles or Stairmasters. It's fighting and running. And you could do that, you could do that in the ring in front of a crowd, or you could do it in a gym. Last night, Jarrett Hurd decided to do it on pay cable, which, against a very limited opponent. That's what made it kind of obnoxious. But it was certainly understandable that he wants to try to change his style. I think you're right. I don't think that one time was enough to make it. It's not going to take after one fight, especially against a guy like that, because for you to do something new, you gotta, you know what I mean? If it was sort of like if he was under pressure from a dangerous guy and using that that sort of cross-arm Tony defense, and it was working, then he knows, okay, I can go back to this. But he never had that. He just, all he had to do was focus and maintain that style the whole thing, and he was never really tested. As Paulie Malignaggi correctly pointed out, all Santana kept doing was throwing punches. There was nothing creative in his attack. So, yeah, how much Jarrett Hurd actually learned last night, we don't really know yet.
Well, time will tell, my man. And
Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate your time, and we look forward to you next week.
Absolutely, Billy C. You have a great day.
You too. Take care. That's my main man, Alex Papali, and giving us his thoughts. He says, excellent point about fighters being coddled early on. He said, on one hand, people say terrible matchmaking. Why? Because a good fight and it wasn't a blowout by the favorite guy. If it went the other way, then they would have been saying that Banana, he was talking about the fight from last week, was a cherry picked and complained about that. He says it was good matchmaking because the underdog was a live dog who's been matched tougher than most 24-year-olds. Had he had a Gallimore, Deloach, Clark, and Cotto on his resume at 24 years old, those fights gave Banana experience he needed to get the job done. Boxing isn't triangular. Williams clearly beat Gallimore, and Gallimore stopped Banana, so Williams beats Banana, right? Doesn't work that way. This kid was matched tough, probably because he didn't have a PBC upbringing. He says if coming up tough doesn't break you, then you get results like what happened last night. Good point on the show. Yeah, well, that is the realistic part, and I say that all the time, that you learn, and as Alex pointed out, the same analogy I've given many times about the sport, like playing the worst team. Are you really the best if you're playing the worst? Fighters' opponents, the level of competition, increase it every step of the way. And when you hit a stumbling block, focus on that level until you dominate. And then you get better. What they do today is they hand them easy fights for 20 fights. Then they position them for a world title fight. They win it, and now we start watching a fighter develop as a champion, which I don't believe in. I think a fighter should be developed prior to winning the belt. One other email here I have that I want to get to real quick. It's from my man Jess. He says, hey, Billy C., clearly this fight last night was for Danny to win. I was surprised he didn't get to finish with the knockout. Danny versus Spence, Manny, or Josito Lopez next. This is Jesse's opinion. He said, Billy, do you really believe Manny Robles and Andy are a good team, but he decided a new trainer was necessary? He really believes. He said the only option being instructed by Al Heyman to is just another example of how we as a society don't hold ourselves accountable anymore. It's and I believe that truthfully, Al Heyman made a mistake. They're painting a picture for Ruiz to not hold himself accountable, and I disagree with it. He says Hurd versus Santana was a total mismatch. Hurd needs to step up his competition and fast. No more Santana-like opponents. I'm okay with Hurd fighting a guy like Santana. My problem wasn't the fight. My problem was the fight that, and then finally he says, Niners versus Chiefs, high-scoring game. Look, everybody knows I'm a disgruntled Jet fan, but my second favorite team has always been the San Francisco 49ers. With that said, I also like the Chiefs. I like the Chiefs. I mean, how can you not like Patrick Mahomes? But I think the 49ers are going to win the Super Bowl. My actual prediction I went on to say yesterday was, and you guys can hold me to this, 49ers 38 and the Chiefs 27. It's going to be a great, exciting game, but the 49er defense will be too much. Joining us right now, and she's too much, is Emily Harney. Good morning, Emily.
Good morning. And ladies and gentlemen, his fourth favorite team is the Patriots.
Oh, get out of here. That's my least favorite team. That's my least favorite team. But I have to respect them. So it is what it is. But, hey, I know you were at the fights last night, and it sounds like you're on your way home. But it was horrible to watch on TV as part of a main and co-main event of championship boxing on Showtime. It's not that I really had a problem with the two fights as stay busy fights. My problem leaned more towards the fact that it was being broadcast on Showtime. What was your thoughts of the fights?
Yeah, I don't know. There was something about the pace of the main event and the co-feature that were really, just kind of slow. And at some point they were booing. They booed more during the Hurd fight than they did the Garcia fight. It was more the Garcia fight towards the end when they both kind of separated a little bit. But it was interesting, and I expected a little bit more speed and oomph from both of them. And I don't mean speed in terms of hand power, but I just mean the movement of the fight. I felt like there were a lot of circles in the co-feature that were run, trying to cut off the ring. And that's always frustrating to shoot. But, for a co-feature fight, like you said, a keep busy fight, you want a little bit more from that. And I get from the fan point of view why they were booing now, and I go back and look at it. At the time, I was like, wow, I'm making kind of good photos here, so I don't know why y'all are booing. But, looking back at it, it was a little bit of a slower pace co-feature and main event than what they should be.
I mean, fights like that, for Danny Garcia, trying to stay sharp and Jarrett Hurd trying, his new trainer trying to take less punishment, etc. I'm okay with them fighting those opponents on the undercard, not as a main and co-main. And then if you are going to practice, you need to at some point say to yourself or your team say to you, okay, great job, now take them out, now finish the fight, end the fight on a high note. And neither one of them did it. They were both, okay with the decisions. And I think it was bad for the fans. And I wonder if, all those fans you heard booing at the Barclays Center who like to come out for fights are going to have second thoughts next time.
Well, I mean, when you look at an undercard that is kind of mediocre too, and you find out what they're paying for tickets, I think you question, where do you spend your money? And with PBC coming back in March, I think people are going to look at that card a little harder if you're a boxing fan in New York and say, do I really want to spend my money? Or can I just sit home and watch these 3 fights and whatever else I can get streamed or whatever? You need some pomp and circumstance. And I've heard people, kind of matchroom sometimes for doing the Logan Paul fights, but man, those are selling. I've had more kids at my son's school come up to me and be like, "You're Sean's mom? Are you going to the Logan Paul or the Jake Paul fight?" And it's like 500 elementary school kids who now are going to watch a fight next week because of what they're doing. And, Sean's sitting there going, "No, but I know Demetrius Andrade," so that creates a whole nother conversation. So, I think some promoters are doing it in a different way to get people excited about what they're watching. And other promoters need to start to take note. Well,
I think I'm glad to hear the elementary level kids are following the sport. No, I mean that. That's a positive for us. But the problem I have with the PBC is that what it appears that they do is create fans of their fighters, not fans of the sport. So if their fighter goes down or the fighter doesn't do well and or leaves the sport, so will that fan base. There's where I think they're selling the sport short. Their fighters are never really in tough fights. You got like the Charlo brothers, who I find myself constantly, criticizing. But the truth of the matter is they don't fight anybody, but yet they talk the smack that they're the best. And it just scares me that, here they are. They are on TV. We are seeing the fighters, but we're not seeing them cross the lines. We're not seeing them fight, challenging fights. And you just wonder how long that fan base is going to stick with them.
Well, I think you wonder how long all those fighters are going to stick with them. Because if you look at the fighters that, they signed initially and how many of those fighters are still there, a good portion of them have moved on because they did realize that, I can't fight out of this group. Why can't I fight the top dogs? They talk like they want to fight the top dogs, like you say, but how much of it comes down to the promoter and not the fighter? I think 90% of it here, unfortunately, is the promoter not wanting to play nice with other promoters, and essentially that ends up screwing the fighter. And those fans, you're right, that are those fighters fans based on what the TV, that they should fight, but they probably never will.
Well, that's the sad part. Pacquiao, if he does fight Danny Garcia, Pacquiao doesn't have anything left to prove. If I'm Pacquiao, I hang him up as it is. But Demetrius Andrade is fighting on Thursday, and I think I just heard back. But I was asking about Demetrius Andrade, but I have a couple of more emails. This one is from my man Rick. He says, "Hey Billy C, I know your biggest criticism of Wilder has been his promotional team. And I agree with some of your criticism, but I'm still kind of split on this issue. I've always appreciated Al Heyman and the PBC's format of putting fights on free TV, and it's one reason I haven't been as critical of them for airing so many showcase-type fights, even though they've mixed in some competitive matchups from time to time. I believe Wilder didn't even start fighting on cable until his rematch with Stavern, so he's actually defending his heavyweight championship on regular TV for a bit, which I think is pretty cool and pretty unique, and it doesn't get enough credit. I'm actually surprised this didn't generate more of a following for him in the U.S. How big of a superstar do you think Wilder would have been with Don King as his promoter? And I'm not talking about the 90-year-old Don King. I mean the Don King from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. If there was some way to make that happen, could he have been bigger than Tyson? It's an interesting question. The fact, I do think that Wilder could have been a bigger star. The simple fact that he doesn't have the talent is an issue for me. Mike Tyson had talent. And he had that persona. He was a full package. Towards the end of his career, the talent didn't shine through, and a lot of his personal and mental issues clouded his talent. But when you go back and watch him, he was very hard to hit. He delivered his punches with power, obviously, head movement, broke his fighters down. Sometimes it didn't take long. He was a well-rounded boxer. Deontay's not. Deontay's a one-trick pony. He's got a knockout punch. That's it. He's got no footwork, no coordination. Zero defense. You get close to him, but his power has been his savior for his whole career. The fact that the PBC has been on free TV, I respectfully disagree with my man Rick. Yes, I agree that free TV, watching boxing on free TV is cool, and that's the way it used to be, and that's how fighters used to gain recognition. But the fact that they're in non-competitive fights, and the fact that the PBC is trying to keep have their own world, and not cross over and fight other promoters and stuff, is preventing the creation of long-term boxing fans. They are creating fighter fans, and the free TV aspect is not really gaining those boxing fans. What boxing needs are boxing fans. And I say that, I know it sounds stupid, but what I mean by that is it needs fans of the sport, not so much fans of the fighter. Now, don't get me wrong. Every fan of the sport of boxing has their favorite fighters, whether they're from current times or whether they're from previous times. So you're always going to have your favorite fighter. But you have to be a fan of the sport in order for it to succeed. If you look at the success of professional football or baseball or basketball, you're dealing with lifelong fans that are born into it or become a fan. And then they're a fan for life, regardless of what happens, whether their team wins or loses. It's a little different in boxing because the careers aren't lifelong. You can't be. I've been a Jet fan since I'm 8 years old. I'm a lifelong Jet fan. My kids are Jet fans. My grandkids are Jet fans. Unfortunately for them, I forced it on them. But the truth of the matter is you have generations of fans. In boxing, it's great to have generations of boxing fans. But what I'm seeing today is that we're seeing fans of specific fighters. Floyd Mayweather is a great example. He has fans and haters. Floyd's not around to watch his fights or to hate him, to watch him lose. How many of those fans are still involved with the sport? You mentioned Deontay Wilder, Rick, and he's got a lot of fans that love to see him do the stupid things and do the crazy stuff and look for his devastating knockouts. But when he loses, how many of them are going to stick around? That's my thought. Thanks for the email. And finally, I got a message from my man Augie from Riverhead, Long Island. And he says, hey, Billy C., I've been forgetting who knocked Rocky Marciano down in sparring. And to his knowledge, it was the only time. And I couldn't think of his name, and I'm like, oh, who's the guy? So I reached out to the Walking Boxing Encyclopedia, my man Henry Haskup, and in literally 5 minutes later, he sends to me an email, and he says, hey, Billy C., it was great hearing from you. The fighter's name was Toxie Hall. Here's a story to go with it. He says Toxie Hall was a heavyweight, and he had a piece of the rock every day. And according to that, he said most of the sparring partners would get hurt in their rib cage and wore football pads to protect them, said Toxie Hall. But for some reason, that was the toughest part of my body. It didn't bother me much. The thing that is that Rocky couldn't do much if you crowded him. But if you gave him room, he'd knock you out. If he hurt me a little bit, I'd turn and run. The one slight exception was when they were preparing for Marciano's defense against Don Cockle in San Francisco on May 16th, 1955. Before they got into the ring to spar, Hall mentioned that the champion was carrying his right hand low and exposing his chin. Marciano said, why don't you just hit me then? So Hall recalled and said, I hit him with the left hook, and down he went. The press was there, and the incident got worldwide coverage. Marciano said nothing at the time, but the next day, when they were doing road work together, the champion stopped and said, Toxie, you son of a biatch, you knocked me down in front of all those guys. But the truth of the matter was that Marciano wasn't really upset. Both he and Toxie Hall laughed about it, and Hall commented and said, Rocky Marciano really enjoyed the rough stuff. So I appreciate my man Henry Haskup for giving me that info, and I want to thank Augie from Riverhead for reaching out. The fight this weekend, the two fights, I'll give you my breakdowns and predictions. Luke Keeler going up against Demetrius Andrade. I don't think it's going to be very competitive, but Keeler, who's got a record of 17-2, with one of his losses being knocked out, but ironically enough, both of the losses came at the hands of Tom Duran. He's 32 years old, 5'10.5" out of Ireland. He's ranked number 28 in the world at middleweight. He's got 2 wins of his 17 that I give him credit for, just 2. His last fight was against Luis Arias, which he won a 10-round decision. That was his best win as a pro. The other win I give him credit for, although the record doesn't look impressive, was back in 2016 when he fought and won an 8-round decision over Bradley Price. Bradley Price is a quality fighter despite what his record looks like. But aside from that, Tom Duran was a fighter that he fought that was decent, and he lost to him both times. The rest of the opponents were not very dangerous. He steps in with Demetrius Andrade, who's a talented fighter, ranked number 7 in the world at middleweight. He's a southpaw, 6'1", 31 years old, undefeated as a pro, 28-0 with 17 knockouts. He's fought some tough guys, not the greatest. He's a talented guy, but not exciting. I don't know what's in store. We talked a little bit about Demetrius Andrade earlier in the show. I don't know what's in store for him and his long-term future, but I do know he's going to get the win on Thursday. But the fight that intrigues me the most on that card is the title fight for the IBF Super Featherweight Championship, which is right now belongs to Tevin Farmer. He's the champ. He's ranked number 7 in the world at Super Featherweight. He's 5'6", 67-inch reach. He's a southpaw fighter. He's got a record of 30 wins, 6 of them only coming by knockout. He lost 4 times, in which he was stopped twice. One of those stoppages were against Jose Pedraza. The other 3 losses came early in his career. He fought and lost to Pedraza back in 2012. He has turned his career around. He's got some decent wins. But when I look at his resume, I give him credit for, I got to be honest, only a couple of bigger names. He did beat Ivan Redkach, and he beat Dallas Prescott in fights back in Prescott in 2015 and Redkach in 2016. His last 6 fights were against decent opposition. Nothing great, but decent opposition. He's a good fighter. He's a good boxer. I like him because he has come up the hard way. Was never handed anything. 264 rounds as a professional. He does have 1 draw. I like Tevin Farmer, and he's not afraid to fight anybody, although his resume doesn't scream with big names. He takes on Jojo Diaz, who's ranked number 11 in the world at super featherweight. He's a southpaw as well. He's the same height as Tevin Farmer at 5'6", but he's given up 3 inches in reach. His record is 30 wins with 15 coming by knockout with only 1 loss. His 1 loss was his world title challenge against Gary Russell Jr. Back in May of 2018. His last 10 fights, like I said earlier, with the exception of his very last fight, have been against all very good opposition. So he has a record of 9-1 against very good opposition. He's got wins over Freddie Fonseca, Charles Hirata, Jesus Rojas. He lost to Russell Jr., but Victor Terrazas, Rafael Rivera, Manuel Avila, Horatio Garcia, all really good fighters. And Andrew Cancio, which was a decent fighter. Ruben Tamayo, Rene Alvarado, all big wins over these guys. Jason Veliz. Joseph Diaz is a body puncher, and I love this kid. He's fast. He's 2 years younger. I don't know if age is going to make a difference, but I do believe that Jojo Diaz had a tougher. I guess the best way to say it is he's got a tougher resume. He's got a better resume to show. I'm picking Jojo Diaz in an upset. I think he beats Tevin Farmer, and I think he's going to work the body, and I think he's got to take some chances in this fight. Tevin Farmer's a boxer. He's going to box him. And obviously, the one guy that gave Jojo Diaz trouble was, Gary Russell Jr., who's a very good boxer. But I think the thing that really gave Jojo Diaz trouble was Gary Russell's hand speed. Something Tevin Farmer, he's got decent speed, but not Gary Russell speed. I'm picking Jojo Diaz in an upset. Listen, boys and girls, I appreciate you spending time with us. And feel free to drop me an email, get your comments, questions, or concerns read on the air. So just email me, Billy at Talkin' Boxing. That's TalkinBoxing.com. Make sure you tune in next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. Until then, I'll leave you with this. Ciao, baby.